Welcome everybody to the Local Catch Network's Meet and Greet Training Webinar Series. My name is Brett Tolley, and I'm with the North American Marine Alliance. We share backbone support to the Local Catch Network with the University of Maine. And I'm really excited to be helping facilitate today's conversation. We have an amazing group of storytellers or experts in this field of seafood to institution. I probably shouldn't have used experts because that puts the pressure on our storytellers, but I did it anyways. I think you all are experts in my mind. But today you will hear stories about a fisherman-centered seafood business working to get local catch, local seafood into state university system. You'll hear about a chef working with her local fishing community to get locally caught seafood onto the school menu for kids. You'll hear about, from the healthcare perspective, what a network of healthcare facilities and hospitals are doing to transform how they're buying seafood, centering around values that align with Local Catch Network. And then you'll also hear a story from a very broad level of efforts to transform how multiple institutions, from the universities to the healthcare to state municipalities and more, are streamlining efforts to shift institutional buying power, again, centering around local catch values. So awesome stories. Before we get into the stories, I just want to take a moment to talk about this webinar series and what we're doing here today, and some of the goals that we want everyone to walk away with by the time that we're done. So this, again, is the Local Catch Network Meet and Greet Training Webinar Series. We will be hosting, I don't know, like maybe a dozen of these over the next year to talk about topics that are of interest to our Local Catch Network members, that relate to seafood businesses, tapping into new markets, or having a conversation to improve the seafood businesses, all with the orientation of enhancing local and regional seafood supply chains. So today's conversation is going to be around moving locally caught seafood to institutions. And we have other topics like how to think about the benefits of seafood cooperatives, or having a conversation about different types of aquaculture like kelp, or having a conversation about how to increase equitable access to locally caught seafood, and a whole range of others that stem from a survey that we did with the Local Catch Network. So that's the overarching kind of vision of what these webinar series are all about. And today we have a couple of goals that we want to accomplish. I think I will read those. So here's what we want folks to walk away with. We want you to just get a better understanding of how institutions are thinking when it comes to seafood purchasing. We want you to walk away with a general understanding of the success and struggles of moving seafood into institutions, opportunities to build relationships with folks who are involved with this seafood to institution kind of like efforts. And I want to flag that one too. I want to emphasize, like, the stories you'll hear today will be very condensed. They'll be broad, but hopefully it may pique your curiosity or maybe inspire you. And our hope is that after this is done, you will feel more connected to the storytellers here and feel welcomed to get in touch and dive into whatever details or support that you might be seeking following the webinar. With that in mind, we will also carve out a good amount of time after we take about a half hour to hear the stories, we will have a question and answer and hopefully have a great dialogue with each other, and aim to wrap up sometime between on the hour coming up to about an hour and a half. We'll aim for an hour to an hour and a half for our time together today. So with that said, before the last thing we want to do before going to our first storyteller is I just want to introduce the local catch network coordinator, Jordan Richardson, to hear a couple of updates about local catch network before we jump in. So again, welcome. Thank you all for being here. And I'll pass it off to you, Jordan.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, hi, everybody. If you haven't already, drop your names and where you're calling in from in the chat. Just to give you guys a little bit of additional background about Local Catch, if you're not familiar with it, is that we are a community of practice. We have about over 500 seafood harvesters, partner organizations, and researchers from across North America who are ultimately committed to strengthening local and regional seafood systems through a number of ways, through community-supported fisheries, selling at farmers market, participating in direct seafood marketing, et cetera. Our aim is to increase the visibility and viability and support to people participating in these direct marketing activities. All of our members hold those core values to the base of what they're doing on a daily basis. And we offer a number of supports to network members, including opportunities for network building between people who are part of the network, research that we're involved in, and then we also provide some technical assistance programs. The network, as Brett mentioned, is supported by an executive committee, NAMA, and then also the University of Maine. I wanted to give a few updates about some upcoming events that we have planned. One of those being the 4th Local Seafood Summit that's going to be held in Girdwood, Alaska in October, early October, October 2nd and 3rd to be exact. And the summit is a place for people to come together to share knowledge, to network and meet one another, to eat good food and celebrate good food, and then also collaborate around the theme of this year's summit, which is building the future of local and regional seafood systems. At the moment, Local Catch is currently accepting proposals for summit sessions to fill out our agenda, and the registration for the summit will be opening here within the next few weeks. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat here for you all to check out more information about the summit. And then I'm going to provide one more update before I pass it over to Alan. In the near term, Local Catches we're also hosting a few webinars to introduce and assist prospective applicants to the USDA LAMP grant funds that are available and open and accepting applications currently. So that includes the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Program, and also the Regional Food Systems Partnership programs. As of this year, 2 of those LAMP grants that I just mentioned are actually going to be putting funding towards institutional activities, which is really in line with today's discussion. So if you all are wanting to learn more about those programs and then also tune into some of the events that we're offering to help assist people apply for those LAMP grants, I've dropped a link in the chat for you all to check out other opportunities that are coming up. For now, I'm going to pass it over to Alan Lovewell from Real Good Fish to talk about successes and challenges for getting local seafood into institutions.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Brett, for bringing us all together. I think we are all familiar with the idea that we all work so hard within our respective bubbles and communities. It's nice to broaden the conversation and really start to meet other folks who are tackling similar challenging problems and can benefit from us all, sharing our experiences and ideas. Beta Tray came about for Real Good Fish through the help of the USDA, and we had secured a local food promotion program grant, which was designated for expanding really sort of the range of our reach and distribution And one of the sort of non-mandatory, but encouraged activities that they were pushing was reaching food deserts. And the definition for that was really low income and low access. That is to say that the mean household incomes and the radius to which people get access to healthy, nutritious foods sort of coalesced into a area where people were really underserved and really weren't getting access to healthy foods. Digging into the fundamental aspect of our business, which is these pickup locations where we deliver seafood, we're really just interested in how do we deliver, these coolers to those locations. And through our exploration, we actually got in touch with the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District to have a conversation about their hopes and dreams about getting more local foods into the school district. And what we realized is that this food desert definition was something that could also be applied in our school systems. And really, when you think about the most vulnerable populations, in our communities, children are really, left to the decisions and care of adults. And, our public school system is really sort of one of the primary ways in which we take care of our children as a society. And the reality was that, the food that these children were eating was not necessarily representative of, what was being grown, even for us in the Monterey Bay, sort of the lettuce capital of the world, where, a large percentage of our food is produced for our nation. Significant numbers of people were not getting access to it. Actually, when you looked at these maps, the irony was that the places that produced the most food for this country were also the ones that were the food deserts and were not getting access to the food that they were producing. It was really quite remarkable. And then also looking into other definitions and statistics, started to learn that children in our public school system were 60 to 70% of those children were living at or below the poverty line and qualified for free or reduced meals. And again, these are just sort of statistics that you would never uncover unless you started digging into, our food system in this way. And that really was the core impetus for Beta Tray. And we started to put all the pieces together, and it was a community effort. It was working with the school district, with their leadership. It was working with the fishermen in our community, working with processors. It really started to become a community effort around rallying the resources and people necessary to make this happen. But the challengers are, I could go on and on. But I think the most important thing that we've learned in Beta Tray is persistence, patience, and being resourceful and connecting with other like-minded folks, that this was something that wasn't going to happen just because we wanted to. It wasn't going to happen with one organization. It was going to happen because there was a community effort. There's lots of people who are also interested in making this happen. And I think that's, from my standpoint, really some of the only ways in which you solve really tough problems is to find those people with aligned interests and values who sit in decision-making positions, who can make things happen and bring them together and put the pieces together to do the hard work. Because to do it alone it really isn't insurmountable. It is essential that you find those allies in these types of projects. I can leave it there, and I'm excited to answer any additional questions as we get through it.
Thank you, Alan. That was really great and inspiring. One of my personal favorite quotes is, I think this is like old African proverb: if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I think, yeah, like really well said. So great takeaway of the importance of community collaboration and not attempting solving what is like a pretty difficult challenge all by yourself and doing it with some persistence and resourcefulness. Feels like a good segue to our next speaker, who I think also utilized quite a bit of community resourcefulness along with some persistence. So would love to introduce Jenny Devivo, school chef and public speaker from Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. And I will pass it off to you, Jenny.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Brett, Jordan, everybody on the panel. So great to be amongst forward-thinking people pushing the food system to be the best it possibly can. My name is Jenny Devipo. I am a chef, educator, all-around lunch lady here on the island of Martha's Vineyard. And for the past 10 years, I have dedicated myself to thinking outside the lunchbox to change the way people are fed in schools, not only here in Martha's Vineyard, but nationally. When I was given the opportunity to create my independent meals program, it was really mission-driven to source as much locally or regionally sourced food as possible. And we have an enormous amount of farms here on the island and fishermen, but for some reason, when I initially started, it was very hard to sort of find that little puzzle piece to get seafood into schools. I was running up against various roadblocks, and I ended up at a farm to seed a school conference where I met a wholesale fish man from the Boston Fish Pier, and the puzzle piece just jumped into my lap. And in 2016, I implemented the first weekly sustainable seafood meals in an elementary school in the nation. And what that basically meant for me was really understanding that I needed to feed my kids not only seafood, because it's an incredible protein, but I needed to continue the mission of eating what the ocean provided, eating what the land provided. So I get a weekly delivery of locally sourced fish, but I don't know what it is. It's a sustainable white fish. So it could be hake, it could be pollock, it could be anything. I've even gotten red tilefish on occasion. And I had to sort of really think outside the box how I could present this to preschool to 8th grade kids and get them to eat it. So I created about 4 or 5 cyclical recipes that I run through since 2016. So the kids are incredibly familiar with it. I'll do a chowder. I'll do a buttercracker crumb. I'll do oven baked fish bites or create like a sort of take on a fillet of fish sandwich. I'll do stews, I'll do tacos. And that allows me to accept whatever the fish it is and throw it into the menu, make this delicious meal for the kids. And when I initially started, I didn't know what the buy-in was going to be. And I can safely say that to date, we are at 100% participation rate for meals. The kids actually love to eat fish just as much as they love to eat pizza. And you're going to think it's crazy, but it's not. And it's been amazing for me because I've connected so beautifully with the fishermen, not only here on the island, but regionally. And they are so generous with their stories. So some other ways that I like to push the boundaries is to be able to tell the story of the catch. So not only do the kids get invested in every bite, but they're invested in the value of that fish and how it got to their table. So telling the story of how the fish was caught and the fishermen and the families and whether they are from Cape Ann or who knows where they're from, the story just ignites a fire inside of these children. And they go home and they tell their families that they had a fish and they know where it came from. And then the cycle just continues. The circle is just spinning around and around and around. And by me and them supporting our local food system, it just drives the accountability of making sure that we are feeding not only ourselves, but our community. We've done everything from oysters to clam bakes, you name it. But sourcing seafood in schools is incredibly doable wherever you are in the country. You can source from Allen in the West Coast. You could go through big service food companies like Cisco, or you can connect with your local fishermen and just try it. Try it once a month. You can make it very affordable, and eating what the ocean provides is a magical way of continuing the story of beautiful sea tales and promoting health in our youth. Because when we feed the future well, we definitely make the future better. So I'm really excited to answer any questions. I share any of my recipes, tips, and tools. We've also incorporated a lot of celebrations of seafood. We've brought some oyster farmers in to spawn the oysters, and we've had aquaponics. And so the educational piece, as well as the eating piece, are so intertwined. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'm excited to share this amazing afternoon with all of you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jenny. That was wonderful. So, okay, so for those who may be running a seafood business, or you're part of moving seafood through the community, if you ever come across a chef that says that it's not possible to take on locally caught seafood, or they can't make a tight budget work, send them to Jenny. Jenny can tell them how it is possible. And I just want to kind of pull out one piece of the story, Jenny, and that was about your like embracing what the ocean was providing. I feel like that is so often one of the key barriers for community seafood to reach the institutions, sensing that where so many institutions have gotten to is buying the same exact seafood 365 days a year, packaged the exact same way, and everybody
Exactly.
relies on this sort of machine. That is not how the ocean really works, right? And so on one hand, it creates this like false demand that the ocean can't handle, but then on the other side, it does not fit with a lot of business models of local fishermen and seafood businesses who are embracing locally caught seafood. So it's just a really key part of all of this is to, in some ways, convince institutions that they need to actually think a lot differently and be embracing kind of like what Jenny just described, getting more creative and thinking outside of the lunchbox with how the fish arrives on the menu and how you work with chefs in the kitchen. So really appreciate that. And that leads into our next speaker. I want to introduce John Stoddard with Healthcare Without Harm. And I'll let John sort of share a little bit more about Healthcare Without Harm and offer his story to y'all today. Off to you, John.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everybody. I'm John Stoddard, based in Boston, Massachusetts. I work for Healthcare Without Harm. We are a global organization that works with healthcare operations to basically align their operations with their mission to promote health. I work for our Healthy Food and Healthcare program and have worked directly with hospitals that are looking to source local seafood. Since this is sort of a storytelling situation, I'm going to start off with a personal story that really won't help this conversation at all, but I'm just going to tell it. When I was 20, went out to Alaska to work in a salmon packing plant, Cook, Alaska. Worked for Ward's Cove. I don't know if they still exist, but it was a great experience. Met a lot of really interesting people, a lot of seasonal workers. Ate fish head stew. Some Vietnamese ladies that prepared Vietnamese stew. My favorite part of the day was 10 o'clock donut coffee break. It was really great. And I ate so much great salmon on the beach and on the heaters in our bunks. So that was super fun. In my current work, we, as I said, work with healthcare in our U.S. food program to sort of marshal their support for a equitable, local, sustainable food system in all the regions of the U.S. So I wanted to just touch upon a little bit of what I see as motivation for healthcare, for buying local seafood. First off, health, of course, being healthcare institutions. And another little story I'll tell is a hospital here in Boston, which is very committed to community health, sustainability, et cetera, learned that some seafood they were buying was injected with like a saline solution. I don't know exactly the background of why they do that, to preserve it or sort of increase the weight of it, but they were disturbed by the fact that what they thought was just fish actually had sort of an additive in it. So that led them to us, where we helped them connect with the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives Association, and they began buying, and still do, buying from Cape Ann Fresh Catch. So instead of ordering by species, which is what most hospitals do, same, salmon, cod, et cetera, they literally just get what's delivered to them. So innovative for hospitals, particularly of their size, that really relies on streamlined, buying from one vendor, et cetera. So that's one little story. In addition to sort of just, personal health or nutrition, hospitals are worried about antibiotic use because there's the connections to antibiotic resistance. So with farmed seafood and using antibiotics, that's another concern of hospitals that would perhaps motivate them to be buying wild caught seafood locally. And then also human rights abuses. So just knowing that buying seafood overseas comes with some risk if you're not able to really track how it was caught or how it was farmed. So that really leads into our, and then final thing I would say is local economy. Hospitals, particularly where I live in New England, often have personal connections, whether it be memories of growing up, with clam chowder and lobster bakes and things like that, or whether they grew up in a seafood community. That sort of understanding that fishing communities are threatened. I think hospitals, the individuals within hospitals, don't want to see that go away. So if you're able to talk to them about that's another motivating factor. And kind of a story connected to that is I was working with a hospital chef also here in the Boston area. She was from Gloucester. And she was, firsthand knowing the struggles that her family and her family, friends, community were facing in terms of, being able to stay afloat as a business. And so she took action in her hospital first by looking at what they were purchasing. And so being able to, switch their sourcing over to, I think they also were using, they were using both Red's Best and also Cape Ann Fresh Catch, or exploring both of those options in any case. So that she was able to switch over certain dishes that had, one standard species into something more versatile to accommodate for what was being caught locally. The second thing she did was start a community supported fishery program for her, for the employees in the hospital. So she was able to sort of use, her position in order to really literally support the community she grew up in and the fishing community. I attended an event, she kind of did a kickoff to help educate people, and Gloucester Fishermen's Wives came out and did a demo with a fish stew, I believe it was. So helping to educate people within the hospital about, the issues facing, and also just how delicious local seafood can be. So I think I'll finish off just saying that we do have guidance for healthcare, which we created a document that was outlining issues in the seafood industry and recommended them to buy locally caught wild seafood and emphasizing less common species, so not always sticking to the same species. We do have we do work nationally, so it doesn't always, that guidance doesn't always work with hospitals, and so we also rely some, and I'm gonna, Tina, our next speaker, who we have a collaboration with on some national standards that we're rolling out later this year. Nationally, if it's more difficult to buy locally, because if you're landlocked or other places, we recommend relying on some of the larger certifiers, but sticking with domestic species within those sort of Monterey Bay, et cetera, certifiers. So I think that'll do it for me.
That was great. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate that. And yeah, great story about the highly motivated chef from a fishing, happened to be from a fishing family in Gloucester, to transform some of the hospital seafood buying policies. It just kind of stands out to me, like Jenny's story too, like being a chef who was highly motivated to shift what was showing up on their menus, sort of similar to your story, speaks to the importance of chefs sort of being in some ways part of the lead to change how institutions are buying. So with that said, I want to welcome our next and last speaker, Tina White. Tina comes to us from the Real Food Challenge, as well as Anchors in Action, which Tina will tell you all about. Welcome, Tina. Off to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Yeah, as Brett said, I'm Tina, and I'm the program coordinator at Real Food Challenge. And yeah, Brett and Jordan, thank you so much for gathering all of us. And it was really great to hear like Alan, Jenny's, and John's stories about all these different ways that like seafood really is really grounded in these values around like collaboration and making sure that we are nourishing our communities at the same time. So I'm here to talk about a project that Real Food Challenge is a part of, as well as John's, the organization that John is a part of, Healthcare Without Harm, and another org as well, where we have started our own collaboration to help, or I guess really, not really help, or help and to also like solidify like the targets, or solidify like the values that we want institutions to hold when it comes to food purchasing. So so the three orgs that I'll be talking about are Real Food Challenge, Healthcare Without Harm, and the Center for Good Food Purchasing. And all three of us, we came together in an alliance called Anchors in Action. And we did this back in 2015 because we did really similar work around like supporting institutions to really like what's the saying, like put their money where their mouth is in terms of like their food purchasing, to really align what they're purchasing for their cafeterias, like for their eaters, to align with the values that they hold and that their eaters also hold. So Real Food Challenge, we work with colleges and universities. Healthcare Without Harm works with hospitals, and the Center for Good Food Purchasing works with K through 12 schools. They also work with like public institutions. So that includes like municipal institutions and also corrections as well. And we wanted to really just like stay in sync, and we had like little collaborations like here and there on how to like bring our sectors together to work with each other, because you know, like transforming the food system is definitely not like one person's job, or it really can't be done by one person. So we were really interested in trying to find like where these overlaps were, like in our networks, and then to also and to really explore that deeply. And right now we're kind of have been embarking on our biggest collaboration yet, where we it's called the Anchors in Action Standards Alignment Project. And I'll just put in the link in the chat here. This is our project site that you can learn more about, but we are aligning basically our program standards together. So that means that we're aligning what we're creating standards around, what values we're creating standards around, what definitions are for these values, what strategies we want to push dining operations to hold, to advance in these values that we're creating standards around, and to also align on the types of certifications or products, attributes that we think advance towards the values that we want institutions to work towards in changing the food system. And so if you look at the site, you can see what those values are, but also just listed out here. We're creating standards around local economies, valued workforce, environmental sustainability, animal welfare, and community health and nutrition. And so, yeah, so we have been working on creating an aligned framework that will feed into each of our programming. And seafood, I think really holds a unique spot in all of this, because it really cross-cuts all of these values in a way. And I think John kind of spoke to this in his story too, but we need to be thinking about how to make sure institutions purchase sustainable seafood, because that has a huge impact on marine ecosystems. And that's totally tied to coastal communities that rely on the seafood, the fishing that they do as well. And there's definitely implications around community health when it comes to seafood. And also aquaculture is on the rise in the US. And I think that brings in implications around fish welfare. And yeah, and there's also people in our processing facilities when it comes to seafood, as well as in the seafood supply chain that that are being exploited. So how do we make sure that institutions aren't buying seafood from the more exploitative side of this industry, and to really make sure they divest from that really, and to invest into seafood that really is nourishing the communities here. So and to really prioritize small and mid-sized fishers. So yeah, so I think we have been so these standards encompass a lot of different food products, but I just wanted to really emphasize the way that seafood that we've been thinking about seafood in this project, in the different task forces that have been researching what these standards should be, and what questions we're grappling with. So I guess, yeah, with that, this project kind of came at a really great time, because our task forces actually finished a draft of these standards, and we just started a public review of that draft this week. So I wanted to invite all of y'all to that public review, to check out the standards, and to, let us know your thoughts if you have them. Make sure that we're upholding the values that y'all have as the local catch network, that y'all might have as individual fishers or fishing companies, because we want to make sure that these standards, really opens the institutional markets for y'all, and that we address that it can be a tool to address some of the barriers or some of the challenges that come with getting into the institutional market. So So how can you engage? So there's going to be a seafood specific survey that is going to be like distributed out to the local catch network, and that should be coming out like later this week, or maybe early next week. And we'll have this public review process until mid-April. So yeah, please fill out the survey if you're interested. We would really love to hear your thoughts. We're also doing one-on-one consultations with all different kinds of producers. So we definitely want to hear from fishers directly, like what their experience has been like. And like, you know, just like whether it be like what was like their like process getting into like different certifications, or getting into or trying to get into the institutional market. Where are y'all selling right now? We kind of just want to hear from fishers too, just to make sure that we really are addressing the concerns or questions or like values that y'all do hold. And yeah, and I'm also available for questions too. So I'll put my email in the chat too. Oh, and I forgot to mention, like, if, and you can email me to ask me this, but this is a public review. So we have a draft that we can share with y'all. So if you want to just like dive right into the draft, see like everything that's been developed, you can email me and I can send that out too. I'd be happy to do that. There's some ways that like we have a spreadsheet where you can enter in your feedback that way as well. But yeah, we thought the survey might be a little bit easier because the draft is like a pretty long document. So it kind of like pulls out the more like seafood specific parts of it. But yeah, want to be transparent with that if y'all do want to take a look at the draft. But yeah, I'm happy to, you know, answer any questions from this, the conversation that we'll be having all together, like since I'll be the last speaker here. And yeah, I'm excited to dig into this.
Thank you so much, Tina. One quick follow-up to Tina's piece. I just want to emphasize the scale that Tina's talking about when it comes to Anchors in Action, and y'all can check this out on the website. But right now, Anchors in Action is representing over 57 like public municipality institutions in 23 cities, 1,800 hospitals, 7,800 elementary and secondary schools, and 100 colleges and universities across the country. And the scope of like dollar impact that they're aiming to have with advancing their criteria through the institutions is on the website. It's a big number. It's $130 billion. Now that's all food, right? But we calculated this once, but I think the seafood component is something like around 5%. It's around $5 to $10 billion of seafood. So open invitation with heavy encouragement for all those involved with local catch. And if you're a seafood business and local catch, get in touch. This is a really amazing opportunity to get inserted directly into this Anchors in Action process to establish their criteria and hear directly from values aligned, values driven seafood businesses that are in our network. So extra plug for Tina. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Okay, so thank you to all our speakers. Really appreciate it. If y'all can hang out with us, please do. We are now going to shift into part 2 of today's webinar. Jordan, if you could like open up our little window boxes, I think, so we can all see each other. Or actually, I think I'm switching to gallery. Sorry.
I think everyone.
that was a self note.
If you go up to the top right of your screen, there should be a view button, and then you can click that, and then if you enter gallery, if you click on gallery, that should open up to everybody.
Okay, so before, let me kind of like frame what we're going to do right now. We like one of the big goals for this webinar was to have like this meet and greet feel to it. So on one hand, we really want you to feel like you've now been connected to these amazing speakers. And if your curiosity was piqued and you have any questions, we'd love to talk about that. And there's so much to talk about. We won't cover it all. Would love to extend an open invitation for everyone to follow up with the speakers that you've heard today. In addition, there's a lot of folks here who also have experience with seafood to institution. And we also want to create space that if you have a story or a resource or just something to offer to the group, we would love to hear that as well. Now, we have, I don't know, about 40 minutes to connect with each other and chat. We want to keep it somewhat informed. We want everyone to feel comfortable, kind of like jumping in, jumping out. We don't have a lot of rules to this necessarily. My job will be just to help keep some conversation going, make sure that one speaker doesn't take up like the 40 minutes together that we have. So we can all be a bit mindful of like, you know, would love to hear from you, and then would also love to maximize like others that we hear from as well. And if you don't have the opportunity to speak, please use the chat box. One idea I just had actually just now was, if it turns out there are a lot of collective resources we have amongst us, like I know Tanya just shared one in the chat box about other seafood to institution efforts. If others have things like that, would love to capture that, both by hearing your stories, but also in the chat box. And it would be a really cool follow-up to this webinar to maybe offer a list of great resources that align with the local catch network. So to just like kick this off, because I already mentioned Tanya, I would love to just like maybe start with a little story of something that's already happening that's really cool related to seafood institution. And then after Tanya kind of shares, then we can open it back up. And I would just ask folks to, we'll start with just letting folks come off mute. You all have control over your own mute. So you can just like come off of mute as you like. And if that gets difficult, I'll then ask folks to instead like raise hands, but we can just start a bit more like informally and see how it goes. We're like around 50 people right now, so a decent sized group. I think we'll manage. All right, so I just want to like, well, you know, say thanks, Tanya, for being up for kicking this off. Tanya Taranovsky with the Farm to Institution New England organization, FINE. So Tanya, please come off mute, and we'd love to just hear a little bit about what FINE is up to.
Sure, thanks, Brett. So I recognize a lot of faces. I know some of you are familiar with FINE. Some of you are advisors and partners, and maybe you've tapped into us for some things before, attended the summit. Farm to Institution New England is an organization based here in New England that's focused on mobilizing the power of institutions to create a better food system. And we do that in a number of ways, but our primary function is to act as a network and to help connect people to resources, to information, and to each other to help with the work that we're all involved in. So definitely invite you to check out FINE. We have a resource database, which is where we try to collate information that is helpful. So if there are sources that you have that you think would be useful to folks trying to work on farm to institution efforts, love to hear about them, love to add them into what we're doing. So if like Brett said, there's more things coming in through the chat, that would be great. I think that, you know, one thing I've been seeing some movement on is, you mentioned this briefly earlier, Brett, is kelp. And institutions have started to explore the use of kelp, which is an interesting opportunity because it's definitely something that's here in New England. But like everything, it's complicated. So, but that's an interesting opportunity that's happening. And the only other thing I'd like to say is just that really thank the speakers who are on this webinar, because I want to make the point that that there's a lot of interconnectedness between all of these efforts. So FINE, for example, is very much appreciative of the anchors and action effort. Those are standards that and a framework that we're hoping to align with and hope to incorporate in the work that we're doing. And we look to folks like Brett and Jordan and Tina and John for a lot of advice and guidance too. So really appreciate that. And I think it's helpful for folks who are less familiar with some of this network activity to understand like the level of kind of interest and support that happens across organizations like all of ours. So yeah, but if there's any questions, also happy to answer anything. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Tanya.
everybody.
Great. All right. So this is sort of like open. If you have any stories or any questions, I'd love to hear from you. And we have some chat stuff. Let's go to Maria. Thanks for raising the hand. And then maybe we can bounce into the chat. There's a good question there. Go for it, Maria.
Hi, yeah. My husband and I have a seafood business in Vermont selling his Alaska cut seafood. And we've been trying to dabble into these institutions, but we're not really sure, I guess, about the volume that places need to have, like schools or colleges, or even hospitals. And so trying to understand, I guess, what the scale is. I was wondering if anyone could share that with us. And then also another thing that we have kind of struggled with is I think the price point. Seems like a lot of the seafood that they're getting is maybe larger volume and at a much lower price point, and sometimes farmed. So kind of any suggestions on price points as well would be helpful.
Great question, Maria. And that builds on a question that Luke had in the chat also, which was around pricing and like what's expected. Are we talking retail, probably not retail, but wholesale or somewhere above? So I don't know, like to the panelists, I'm kind of looking at you, John, but if others have any insight, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I can speak to pricing, honestly. Tanya shared some case studies that I'd recommend checking out. I was just looking at one we worked on with her with Boston Medical Center just to check because I knew that there were some volumes in those case studies, and it said that annually this hospital was purchasing 6,000 pounds a year of seafood, if that gives you an idea. And that's a large hospital, so that's you know, a decent indicator. I can't think of sort of like what people pay per pound. I don't know if anyone else has got that. Oh, it looks like Jenny's got some info for us.
So for me, I buy about 100 plus pounds a week, and my school runs for 182 days. And with Reds, who I work with, I purchased something called the Catch of the Day program, which is a bycatch. So I'm predominantly paying about $5.50 a pound, which is incredibly affordable. So I don't know if that sort of monetary and weight issue. My school feeds about 600 people, sometimes less, but I would say if you were dealing with like a traditional elementary school in Vermont, probably 100 pounds plus would be a starting point for that institution. And then think about, you know, what your price point would be. But for me, it's about $5.50 a pound.
Yeah, that sounds right. We've been involved with a couple projects as NAMA, and one of them was helping to work with a fishing group who is creating a value-added dogfish product, and the price point to some of the institutions they sourced was around, I think, $5-6. Let's go to Luke, and then I want to also get to a comment in the chat about grants. Go for it, Luke.
So one of the thoughts I had with regard to price point, just because like Maria was saying, it doesn't overall and sort of the just in the regular business model, sort of the price point and the volume doesn't quite match up for a lot of us, for institutions. But like Jenny was pointing out, if you have a bycatch scenario, or I even thought of us like in Bristol Bay, there's sometimes almost whole seasons where we're on limits because the processors are plugged. And I wondered if anybody had ever tried anything where they had some sort of contract where, the buyer, in the event of those types of conditions, like unforeseen bycatches or unforeseen, limits, where you have, this time where you're just watching fish go by and you can catch them, but you can't sell them unless you have a buyer lined up where they could get it at a discounted price, where it makes sense for them. It's good for them. They're getting it cheaper than they could any other way. And it's better than having you and your crew just sitting on the beach watching fish and over escapement happen.
Go for it, Alan.
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Or Alan, can I nudge you too? Would you mind tacking 2 on? Because in addition to the question around like the bycatch, there was a question about grants and how grants can be used to spark some of this. And so if you could just maybe emphasize your own experience with grant, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can speak to both. So I'll start with sort of what you're mentioning, Luke, and I'm glad you brought it up. I think, a lot of these programs exist because of what you have actually described, which is most of the seafood that we've been delivering and started the program with, and what Jenny's been doing, it's overage, really, sort of like the people are, fishermen or the processors on sitting fish that aren't going to be sold otherwise. So they're willing to sell it at a discounted price so that they're not sitting on it and incurring that loss. And it can happen anywhere in that supply chain, right? It can happen with the fisherman, it can happen with the processor, it can happen with a distributor. And again, COVID was a great example of complete mayhem in all these supply chains where there was fish sitting idle, not going anywhere. So, paying attention to the market, paying attention to your processors and their activity, paying attention again to, where you're trying to ultimately get the seafood to, you are looking for these windows of opportunity where that demand is there. Obviously the price points are really sensitive. But as you know, in fisheries, it's boom or bust. And when it's busting, then that's when the price is plummeting and there's significant opportunity to get fish where it needs to go at a low cost. In the industry, like the unsexy term it gets called is, like the dumper accounts. Basically, you get grouped into this, account basis where it's like, if you need to get rid of fish, these are the people that you can potentially get rid of it in volume and at a price that, makes it happen. To answer the question about grants, I think from what I read, there's interests at all levels, local, regional, national. The USDA, and again, if you're interested in learning more about the USDA, I think Local Catch has done an awesome job, building that bridge and really starting to figure out how to usher more local catch network businesses and fishermen and organizations into the channels of the USDA, because they care and they want more fishermen and seafood moving through their channels. And so, the grants are really designed to support that. The local food promotion program is one. The other is their farm to school program. And that's, a straight channel in terms of just sort of identifying opportunities for doing what we're discussing here. At the local and regional level, there's just foundations everywhere that, have a social and environmental lens and focus in on food systems and the environment and ocean. I'll point out some of the work that we did with the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust and Sherry, who's here, and I'm sure she'd be happy to speak about it as well. But during COVID, there was an organization that, was providing philanthropic funds to community organizations like the Fisheries Trust and opening supply chains and avenues for markets to provide seafood to food banks, as an example. And we were one of the organizations that helped with that, recognizing that all the schools that we had seafood for were no longer, in session, in person, and we needed a way to get that seafood to people who really needed it. And so, again, there are organizations who, again, at the national, local, and regional levels are acutely aware of the work that we're all doing. They don't make themselves as widely accessible as we would like. But again, with the internet and networking, it's not insurmountable to start to put together a list of folks that, really want to help and see you succeed. But I think the most important thing that any of these grantors are going to want to know is that you've done your homework, that you know who you're trying to get the seafood to, the supply chains, everyone who's involved, the freezer companies, the distribution channels, the price points, the process. They want to know, all those things, and they want to know that the money that they're going to offer you is going to make it happen. Very few of the grant opportunities out there are like exploratory and are set up so that you can research those opportunities, but they do exist.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. Okay, I want to see if I can maybe connect to folks in the chat. We heard from executive chef Nick at the Maine Medical Center, who offered some great comments. And then we just had Kate Masery with Eating with the Ecosystem ask this question about, for folks who are on the buying side for institutions, like, how are you receiving the fish? Are you looking for fillets? Have you tried whole fish or like other, like what's the packaging that you seek? If you're around, Nick, would love to maybe like pose that question to you, get your thoughts, like in your experience, like what are you looking for in terms of packaging? And then Kate had also nudged Jenny to just get Jenny's thoughts on that as well. But are you around, Nick, to hop in on that? Did we lose you? I don't know. Going once, going twice. Nick's probably taking an order or something on the side. But Jenny, do you want to hop in on that question? Sort of like, yeah, what do you look for receiving? How do you like to receive the fish, and what have you tried?
I normally get large fillets, but I've done whole fish as well. And that is, you need to break it down, but that's very doable. I often get lobsters that can't be sold at all at market because maybe they have a diseased shell, and I'll just get them whole. So I'll boil them and process them. I've also done green crabs. So really, I'm very flexible. But I think the reality is, for most institutions, as far as the schools that I've helped implement a seafood program, is they're looking for an ease. We've also gotten some flash frozen. Some of our local fishermen have the technology to, catch and then freeze. So there are a lot of options. But me, I think I'm a little bit crazy. I'll take anything. But predominantly, I think it's fillets.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny.
I'll also add to that it's typically boneless and skinless. Like across all the institutions, they want to minimize all risk of someone choking on a bone. And, certainly I know with the hospitals that we've spoken with, and certainly with all the schools, universities, it's, there can't be any bones in there. Otherwise, there's some serious liability issues.
Right on. I see that Chris asked a question in the chat about the procurement, some oftentimes being a sort of barrier or a blocking point when it comes to the price points, and asking the question, has there been any successes around that? Tina, I was wondering if you had any, so I feel like Real Food Challenge works really closely with procurement departments at universities and have experienced a lot of those blocking moments or excuses, right? Oh, we can't do this and blah, blah, blah. and there's some success stories there, maybe. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I guess like I'm gonna be like just speaking from just like institutional knowledge that like previous staff has shared with me around this. But that is, yeah, definitely one of like the challenges that comes up with this type of work is that you know, that there's kind of like, I mean, also like depending on like the dining that a school has, like I think Tanya like kind of like laid out the two types in the chat too. Like if a schools can have like self-operated dining where it runs like a department at the institution, or it's outsourced to food service management companies. And so that kind of like, then like you kind of have to like follow that to see like where like who gets to actually decide the budget. Like is it university admin like in our sector, or is it like a third party company? So a lot of the like work that Real Food Challenge has done in the past is to really like build campaigns around changing those like really structural like issues that don't allow for institutions to prioritize like these like local and sustainably harvested seafood. So that's kind of been our angle and our strategy too. And we still do that to this day. We coach students to run campaigns so that institutions commit to like saying that they're going to like prioritize, you know, small and mid-sized like harvesters and producers. And really that's like the first step, right? Because then we get a commitment, and then now like accountability can happen from there. And then I like, for me, I kind of see like the standards as kind of the next step. Like, okay, like we are now like, I get, or maybe in tandem with these campaigns that students are running, but once we can get institutions to like sign up for this, then we like need to like also like specify like what that actually means so that it can be implemented. And I'm just pulling up the draft of the standards right now just to share like one way that we're approaching this, like addressing this challenge. We did include like a overarching strategy that that really like says like institutions need to like budget for like the language in our in the standards is the true cost of food, but to really like budget for the true cost of food, and to really look at like how like cost savings can happen so that like those cost like whatever like I guess could be left over. I know it's not like that simple sometimes in procurement, but like where we can find room in the budget to like make sure that that's allocated to yeah, to folks who are harvesting and growing food sustainably and in the region. I'll just drop like the strategy in the chat once I find it. But that's been how I've been addressing it in my work.
Brett, I could make a brief
Please.
comment to Chris. I think that similar to what Tina's talking about, price is a barrier. It's been a barrier for so long, and we're starting some direct work to actually message to hospitals that if they're going to make commitments around food, that they should basically put their money where their commitment is, and that these types of commitments, and I believe that hospitals like really are committed, but they're not seeing that in their budget. So we're trying to frame some work around ways folks can like make incremental increases in their budgets, and why they should do so. I'd also encourage people to connect to organizations like ours and Tina's, because we might be able to, while I can't sort of advocate for a specific business, I can share resources, you know, and our networks would be the folks that would maybe be more likely to be more flexible around price. So I don't know if you do direct like cold calls to institutions and how that works for you, but I think you could see us as a resource. And then also looking at places where good food purchasing policies have passed. So, you know, cities that have adopted good food purchasing policies are kind of compelled by law or legislation to be supporting local food, to be supporting a certain set of standards. So that just could be a way to sort of identify opportunities where people have actually made commitments to improving, you know, their sort of quote unquote values-based purchasing. So that might just be a place to look.
Great. Thank you, John. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to add something to John's
Please.
statement as well. If real quick, like I think one of the just point about putting your money where the mouth is, the issue is that these institutions see the seafood and food in general as a cost center, not a value center. And the way you flip that, right, the way you change that narrative is to make it a value center. And the value center that you bring is your story, is your narrative. It's the press. It's putting the eyes on the organization through the media, through social media, through your local newspaper, through national publications, if you can get there, that say, look at this organization and the good work that they are doing, and they will pay for that. And this is one of the ways in which you can help them put their money where their mouth is, because you take it from being a cost center and you turn it into a value creation center. And so if they can differentiate themselves that way, it's extremely compelling value that you can bring to the table.
Thanks for that, Alan. Luke, you got your hand up?
So I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 of us that fish the bay here, and there's supposed to be, you know, 72 million fish forecast to return this summer. The processors in their report, they don't have the capacity to process a lot of that. I mean, it's the largest forecast in history. And on the backside of the supply chain, I don't see there being much surplus because the market's really good. I think what they pack, they're going to sell. And so really it's that over escapement that's sitting there that's, you know, but the problem is, you know, as fishermen, I could see myself, you know, when we're on limits and we're not doing anything for 12 hours a day because we catch our limit in 4 hours. And I could see us, you know, catching 2,000 or 3,000 pounds and being able to head and gut them and fly them out with 1,000-pound totes to Chicago and get them there like in 1.5 days or so with coolant. But it's not really feasible to get it down and out to institutions, you know, fillet, skin off and pin boned and all of that, 3,000 pounds, you know. Have you heard of any, like, is there any way that, you know, if a few of us were to be able to get that fish out of the bay on those limit days where someone else could finish flaying those H&G fish and deboning them and skinning them, so then they could go to institutions at a price that would be, you know, work for them?
Yeah, great question, Luke. And let me just capture is sort of the vision that you're holding, or the question is around if a couple of you guys who are fishing and can kind of pool your volume together, it's like, you're asking, are there models where folks have worked with an existing like distributor that's kind of local that could help you be a middle person to the institution? Or was there something else? Does that kind of capture it?
Yeah, because I can't, you know, I think most of us can on the grounds,
right,
you know, catch that volume and then process it to what the institutions want and freeze all of it. Because, you know, our throughput in these, you know, on the grounds is not is not there. But if we could get it out, just real rough, sort of process, we can chill it with slush ice. That's not a problem. And we can head and gut it. That's quick. But I don't think we could get it to the point that the institutions, in a state that they would want it. And the only way to get it to them at that price point would be if we aren't making any money otherwise. So we might as well, put our nets in the water. And it's not gonna be hard to catch them because nobody else has their nets in the water because all the processors are plugged. All of their fishermen have their nets out of the water. But the problem is, we're not going to be able to get them to that final change of state that they would want. And so are there any mechanisms that are already set up where producers, get their raw product, not raw, but not really, in the position what they want, where they take that and then push it out to institutions?
Great question.
I have a question and suggestion. Why would you not just, if you can get it to the lower 48, why would you not take the H&G fish and freeze it whole and then later do a thaw, fillet, frozen situation again? Sockeye in particular does that really well. So I think if you've got a barrier, it's just the getting it down to the lower 48. But if you can get it in a day or two down to anyone who will freeze your stuff, all they got to do is dip it, glaze it, freeze it. That doesn't seem hard. Then you can get around to whatever you want, whenever you want. It's my idea. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Eventually it would need to get into, that boneless, skinless state for the hospital or the school or whatever. But that would definitely save time. Allow them to do it over a period of time rather than doing it all at once.
That's great. Thanks, Chris, for jumping in. Shout out to Skipper Otto's community supportive fishery. If Tracy's around, Tracy Sylvester might be willing to chat. I wanted to tee you up potentially. I see Tanya has her hand up too. But I know the Seafood Producers Cooperative has kind of an interesting model that enables some of their cooperative fishermen members to process their own fish and get it shipped into different places, whereas the fisherman member still maintains some control over it, which kind of gets into a little bit of this concept of cooperative models and what that makes possible, which will be a future webinar topic. So we don't have to dive into that. But since you're here, Tracy, and if you're not have a child on your lap or something, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Off just because in the middle of a few things here, but yeah, that's actually been a big issue with the co-op because a lot of fishermen want to be able to process their own catch, and even in the co-op, it's the co-op has about 500 members. Not all of them are actively fishing, but it's still really hard for the plant to switch over and do these small custom loads. So what we've been doing is just buying the product back from them wholesale, but it's not necessarily from our boat, especially right now, because I've been here on Cape Cod. But yeah, that's been something that's been really tricky to navigate, because if fishermen are all breaking off and processing their own stuff, does that pull away from the co-op, or can we somehow work that independence into the co-op model? So it's definitely tricky. But as I was just listening to you guys, I was thinking the co-op in particular is in a great position if we can figure it out to do this kind of direct to institution work. They have definitely a little more flexibility to do some custom cuts here and there. It's just sort of a big organizational issue. But yeah, I would say it's like a co-op model is not necessarily the answer, but it also is a good starting point to to try to work out how we might be able to get some of that stuff back. Like I was thinking about, the boneless to skinless, or boneless, skinless being important. That makes sense. And there's a lot of products like little offcuts that we could deal with that don't have that problem. Burger meat, stuff like that. All these things that are normally wasted. Sometimes it's not having enough help at the plant through COVID's been a big problem as far as getting like black cod tips or salmon, loose salmon meat, stuff like that, that it's cheaper. But if we had these connections with institutions, which I don't think that they have any right now, that could be a really cool way to guarantee that that stuff's going to move quickly. So just helpful listening, because I think it could be a good direction for a co-op that's always looking for ways to kind of reduce waste and be more efficient, because we really are, our co-op's running on like a skeleton crew, basically, employee wise. So yeah, I don't want to go on too long, but not sure if I
Thanks,
answered your
Tracy,
question.
for letting me put you on the spot. Yeah, you answered my question. So we're almost at the hour-and-a-half mark. I do want to pass it to Tanya to offer some additional thoughts, and then we'll maybe have time for one more, and then want to wrap it up with back to Jordan Richardson to just again like highlight local catch network's role to help folks with grant applications and navigating both the USDA opportunities to enhance our local regional seafood supply chain, as well as NOAA. So Tanya, maybe somebody else for a final comment, and then Jordan.
Just briefly, Kate in the chat mentioned a shared kitchen in Rhode Island, and that's an interesting idea to maybe pursue. And also, I was going to bring up in Rhode Island the fact that there's like multiple agencies and food systems groups kind of trying to figure out how to bring processing capabilities for locally caught squid into the state. And it's huge and it's ongoing, and it's been going, a discussion's been going on for years, but that kind of partnership to think about ways to improve processing opportunities might be worthwhile. And a regional food system partnership grant might be an interesting way to bring in some funding to do something like that. And so if maybe that's something, Jordan, I'll end there and let you think about whether that's something maybe to center a little conversation around when you have that conversation about some of these LAMP grants, because the Regional Food System Partnership Grant is one of the LAMP grants. Sorry, so many ridiculous acronyms. We thought seafood was bad with acronyms. USDA is insane.
Thank you, Tanya. Would you guys, Tanya, if you don't mind, and Kate, I'm looking at you too, just because I feel like you guys have some really cool resources and connections to some of these like food hubs that are involving seafood. Would both of you mind just putting your emails in the chat? And I just like, if you don't mind, I'm inviting others who are curious to learn more details to like follow up with y'all directly, because I think both of you have some really powerful like stories. You know who to go to. Thank you. Anyone else want like the final? Well, ideally, it's not a question. No, we can do a question. Just like final person to like wrap up this portion of the webinar. Anybody? I didn't set you up very well. You can't ask a question. Well, let me just, I'll kind of sound off, and then I'll pass it off to you, Jordan, for the final word. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. This was a really fantastic group of folks, a great way to kick off our meet and greet webinar series. We'll share the link, and please just spread the word around this, and hope you'll join us for next time. And just a ton of appreciation for all the work and wisdom that's within this group. Thank you so much. Off to Jordan for the final word.
Yeah, I guess I just want to echo that. I'm really happy to have everybody here on the call today, especially the panelists, and then everybody who was able to attend, share. I'll maybe also echo Tanya, where Local Catch Network is in a position where we're trying to navigate all of these different funding opportunities and to try to understand how are they applicable to seafood specifically. So a few ways that we're doing that is we're engaging USDA on pretty regular communications, trying to understand their commodity purchasing programs and different grant opportunities, again, that would apply to people in the seafood space. And so last year and this year, what we're doing is we're offering technical assistance specifically around those LAMP grants. And so there are, again, 3 that are currently open for applications and that seafood producers, harvesters, businesses can apply for. There are some eligibility things, but we won't get into the nitty-gritty details for now. But what I will say is that this year we will be hosting a forum. So that forum will be 3 hours that you can attend as much or as little as you'd like. We're going to be having grantees that have received grant funding for those LAMP grants speak to their projects, so you can get an understanding of like what has been funded in the past. And then we'll have breakout sessions with grants management specialists who are staff of the USDA to be able to speak to these different programs and answer questions people have about the programs. There is a new institutional project track that is included in the Regional Food Systems Partnership Grant and the Local Foods Promotion Program grant. And that is speaking directly to some of these conversations that are happening today about how do we aggregate these local food products and then distribute them to institutions. And so, you know, these are all things that I think the USDA is thinking about and things that I think that the seafood community should tap into. And so I guess the role that Local Catch Network plays is to, again, understand these opportunities and understand the needs of the seafood community so we can communicate that with the USDA, and then we can also offer assistance to help people apply for these grant opportunities. So we will have that forum that's coming up in April that I would highly suggest you all attend. Prior to that, USDA has a few webinars speaking specifically about the grants and talking about eligibility and kind of the nitty-gritty of those grant programs that I would encourage you to look at. The RFAs are currently available on the website, and I will share those links with you following this webinar. And then we'll also have office hours. So following the forum, we'll have more time for open discussion like this, where people can maybe partner with one another to put in a grant application, to kind of troubleshoot with one another, and to really think about how are we going to refine our project ideas in order for it to be like a really solid application that we're submitting. So what I will say is that some grants are definitely going to be like a bit of a heavier lift administratively, like these large federal grants. And we're just trying to make it a little bit more digestible for people. One more thing I wanted to add to this conversation is like grant funding, I think, is incredible and a really awesome tool to get what you're doing off the ground. But the work like Tina and John are doing is also very important to continue that work. And so, you know, their work is to have people help institutions like understand like why is it important to be purchasing from local seafood harvesters and producers. And so engaging in that work, I think, is equally as important, if not more, than also getting visibility by receiving grant funding. And so I think there's like a multi-pronged approach to making sure that seafood is existing in this space, and grant funding can just kind of help kick that off to begin with, but then there also needs to be some follow through in terms of policy. So anywho, I will follow up with information about some of the grants that are coming up. And if you guys have any questions about that, please do feel free to reach out to me directly about grant funding.
Oh.
And then Brett, I don't know if you want to wrap up.
No, that was, you got the last word.
Well, I guess that's kind of it for now. We will put our heads together and send you guys all these amazing resources. And yeah, just really look forward to continuing the conversation. And thank you all for your time today and coming together on this.